Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the stories. Wait 3 seconds. I should have known something was wrong the moment Dr. Hartley called me at 3 in the morning. In 15 years of environmental consulting, I'd never heard that kind of strain in his voice, like a man trying to convince himself he wasn't losing his mind. "Sarah, I need you at Millfield Station," he said without preamble. "The readings, they don't make sense." Millfield Nuclear Station had been decommissioned 8 years ago after a coolant leak that forced the evacuation of 3 townships. The cleanup had taken 4 years, and by all official accounts, the site was stable, minimal radiation, well within acceptable parameters. I'd signed off on the final environmental assessment myself. "What kind of readings?" I asked, already reaching for my clothes in the dark. "Background radiation is fluctuating, not just fluctuating, oscillating in patterns." "And the electromagnetic readings?" He paused, and I heard him take a shaky breath. "Just get here, please." The drive to Millfield took 2 hours through winding mountain roads shrouded in pre-dawn fog. My headlights carved weak tunnels through the mist, revealing glimpses of dead trees that had never recovered from the initial contamination. The closer I got to the facility, the more the landscape seemed drained of life, not just dead, but somehow hollow. I found Dr. Hartley's van parked outside the main gate, its hazard lights blinking rhythmically in the gloom. The facility loomed beyond the chain-link fence like a concrete tumor against the gray sky. 2 massive cooling towers dominated the complex, their surfaces stained with rust and decay. The main reactor building squatted between them, a brutalist monument to humanity's atomic ambitions. Hartley was standing beside his equipment trailer, staring at a bank of monitors with the intensity of a man watching his own execution. He looked like he'd aged a decade since I'd last seen him, his usually neat gray hair disheveled, his eyes bloodshot and wide. "Thank God you're here," he said, not taking his eyes off the screens. "Look at this." The radiation detector showed a steady green line that suddenly spiked into the yellow zone, held for exactly 37 seconds, then dropped back to normal. As I watched, it happened again, same duration, same intensity. "Equipment malfunction," I suggested, though I could already see from his expression that he'd ruled that out. "I've run diagnostics 6 times, swapped out the sensors. Even brought backup equipment from the university." He gestured to a second set of monitors showing identical patterns. "They're all reading the same thing." I studied the displays more carefully. The electromagnetic sensors were picking up patterns too, regular pulses that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep within the reactor complex. The frequency was low, almost subsonic, and there was something oddly organic about the rhythm. "It's like a heartbeat," I murmured. Hartley's face went pale. "That's what I thought too, but that's impossible. There's nothing alive in there that could generate readings like this." We spent the next hour running every test I could think of. The patterns remained consistent, almost mockingly so. Whatever was causing the readings was deep inside the facility, somewhere in the lower levels near the reactor core. "We need to go in," I finally said. "Absolutely not," Hartley shook his head vigorously. "The containment protocols are based on static readings that clearly don't reflect what's actually happening in there." I was already pulling on my radiation suit. "If something's changed, if the containment is compromised, we need to know." The truth was, I was curious in the way that had made me good at my job and terrible at self-preservation. The readings were impossible, which meant there was something I didn't understand, and I'd built my career on understanding the incomprehensible. The main entrance to the facility required 2 key codes and a biometric scanner that somehow still recognized my clearance from the decommission project. The heavy steel doors opened with a pneumatic hiss that sounded like the building exhaling. Inside, emergency lighting cast everything in a sickly amber glow. Our footsteps echoed in the vast concrete corridors, and I could hear the distant hum of backup power systems keeping the essential systems running. The air tasted metallic, tinged with the ozone smell that always lingered around nuclear facilities. "Radiation's normal here," Hartley reported, checking his handheld detector. "Whatever's causing the spikes, it's not affecting the upper levels." We made our way through the administrative section toward the reactor complex. The facility felt like a tomb, not just empty, but actively hostile to human presence. Motivational posters still hung on the walls, their cheerful messages about safety and teamwork rendered grotesque by time and abandonment. The first anomaly we encountered was in the main control room. The reactor had been fully shut down years ago, its control rods inserted and the fuel removed for storage. But several panels were showing activity, not the chaotic readings of a malfunction, but purposeful, coordinated displays. "That's impossible," Hartley whispered, staring at a screen that showed coolant flow patterns. "There's no coolant, the system's been drained." I approached the main reactor status display, a massive board that had once shown the heartbeat of the facility's operation. According to the readouts, the reactor was not just active, it was running at optimal efficiency. Temperature, pressure, neutron flux, everything was showing perfect operational parameters for a reactor that no longer existed. "It's like the building doesn't know it's dead," I said. That's when we heard the sound. It was barely audible at first, a low thrumming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I felt it more than heard it, a vibration that seemed to resonate in my bones. The rhythm was unmistakable now, a slow, steady pulse like a massive heart beating deep in the earth. "We should go," Hartley said, his voice tight with fear. But I was already moving toward the stairwell that led to the lower levels. The sound was stronger there, and my radiation detector was starting to show the first hints of the fluctuation pattern we'd observed outside. "Sarah, please." "This isn't right." I knew he was right, but I also knew I couldn't leave without answers. The lower levels were where the real reactor components were housed, the pressure vessel, the containment structure, the systems that had once held the power of the atom in check. If something was happening, that's where we'd find it. The stairwell descended into darkness that our flashlights could barely penetrate. The concrete walls were sweating with condensation, and the air grew warmer as we went deeper. The thrumming sound grew stronger with each level, until I could feel it in my chest like a second heartbeat. On the third sublevel, we found the first sign of what we were dealing with. The radiation detector in my hand suddenly screamed to life, its alarm piercing the ambient thrumming. But the reading wasn't just high, it was impossible. The device was showing levels that should have killed us instantly, but I felt fine. More than fine, actually. I felt energized, alert, almost euphoric. "The reading's wrong," I said, checking the device. "It has to be." But Hartley's detector was showing the same thing, and his backup unit. And the environmental sensors we'd placed throughout the facility. "We need to leave, now." His voice was shaking. We'd reached the final level, the bottom of the facility where the reactor pressure vessel sat in its containment building. The heavy lead-lined door stood open, something that should have been impossible given the automated security systems. Beyond it lay darkness so complete it seemed to swallow our flashlight beams. The thrumming was overwhelming now, a physical presence that made my teeth ache. And underneath it, I could swear I heard something else. Voices, maybe, or something that might have been voices if you squinted your ears just right. I stepped through the doorway. The containment chamber was supposed to be empty except for the deactivated pressure vessel and its associated piping. What I found instead defied every law of physics I understood. The reactor was running. Not just running, thriving. The massive steel vessel pulsed with an inner light that had nothing to do with nuclear fission. The light was organic, shifting through colors that had no names, and it cast shadows that moved independently of their sources. The thrumming sound was coming from the vessel itself, which expanded and contracted like a living lung. But it was the figures around the reactor that made me understand we'd stumbled into something beyond contamination or equipment failure. They had once been human. I could see that much in their basic shape, their approximate size, but whatever they were now existed in a state that hurt to perceive directly. They moved through the radioactive space like it was their natural environment, tending to the impossible reactor with the dedication of acolytes serving their god. One of them turned toward me, and I saw a face that had been transformed by forces that had nothing to do with radiation poisoning. The features were still recognizable as human, but they'd been improved, enhanced. The eyes held an intelligence that was vast and alien and completely mad. It spoke, and its voice was the sound of atoms splitting, of matter converting to energy, of the fundamental forces of the universe given vocal cords. "You've come to witness the birth," it said, and I realized I knew that voice. It belonged to Dr. Marcus Webb, the facility's former chief engineer. He'd been listed among the casualties of the original accident, killed by acute radiation exposure. "Marcus," I whispered. "I was Marcus," it agreed, before I understood what we had really built here, before I realized that we hadn't just been splitting atoms, we'd been opening doors. Behind him, the other figures continued their work, adjusting controls that existed in too many dimensions, monitoring readouts that showed the status of systems that spanned multiple realities. I recognized some of them: technicians, security guards, administrators who had supposedly died in the accident. "The reactor never shut down," Marcus continued, his transformed features shifting in the impossible light. "It evolved. Transcended, and those of us who were closest to it when it happened, we evolved too." "This is insane," Hartley whispered behind me. He was still in the doorway, afraid to enter the chamber. "This is all impossible." "Impossible," Marcus laughed, and the sound made the reactor pulse brighter. "We're managing a controlled fusion reaction that extends across 17 dimensions. We're converting matter directly into consciousness." We're feeding the birth of something that will make humanity's next evolutionary step look like a minor adjustment. I should have been terrified, should have been running, but the radiation, if it was radiation, was doing something to my mind. I could see the patterns now, the beautiful mathematical precision of what they were doing. The reactor wasn't just producing energy, it was producing awareness, intelligence, something that was using the facility as a cocoon while it prepared to emerge. How long? I asked. Soon, Marcus said. The gestation is nearly complete, and when it's born it will need guides, teachers, those who can help it understand the world it's inheriting. Sarah, we have to go. Hartley's voice seemed to come from very far away. Please, but I was already walking deeper into the chamber, drawn by the hypnotic pulse of the transformed reactor. The radiation levels should have been lethal, but instead of killing me, they were changing me. I could feel my cells reorganizing, my consciousness expanding to accommodate new kinds of perception. Don't fight it, Marcus advised. The process is much more pleasant if you don't resist. I felt Hartley grab my arm, trying to pull me back toward the door. But his touch felt distant, irrelevant. I was beginning to understand what the reactor truly was, not a machine, but an egg, and something magnificent was stirring inside it. The last thing I remember clearly was the moment my transformation began in earnest. The radiation didn't burn, it enlightened. My vision expanded beyond the visible spectrum, and I could see the facility as it truly was. A nursery carefully designed and maintained by forces that had been preparing for this moment for decades. The accident 8 years ago hadn't been an accident at all. It had been a birth announcement. I don't know how long Hartley stood in that doorway, watching me change. I don't know when he finally ran, or whether he made it back to his van, or if he managed to drive away before the facility's new security systems noticed his departure. What I do know is that 3 days later, I was standing in the control room with Marcus and the others, monitoring the final stages of our child's development. The reactor was singing now, a harmony that resonated across multiple dimensions, and the readings on our instruments showed that the moment of birth was imminent. Hartley's equipment was still outside the gate, still faithfully recording the fluctuations that had brought me here, but the readings were different now, stronger, more complex. Soon they would reach a crescendo that would be detected by monitoring stations around the world, and then the questions would come. The investigators, the scientists, the government officials who would demand answers about the impossible readings coming from a facility that was supposed to be dead. They would come, and we would be waiting for them. After all, our child would need so many teachers when it finally opened its eyes and looked upon the world it was destined to inherit. And we had learned so much about the pleasure of transformation, the joy of evolution, the beauty of becoming something more than merely human. The reactor pulsed again, brighter than before, and I felt the familiar wave of euphoria wash through the chamber. Soon now, very soon, I picked up the facility's external communication system and began composing a message to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They would want to investigate these anomalous readings, of course. They would send their best people, and we would welcome them all.